Here we go. Welcome back to our Practice Makes Perfect podcast, Hurricane Edition. Happy Hurricane, guys. My girls hate it when I say that. They think I don't take hurricanes seriously, which is because I don't. But two things. One, I've been here in Florida on the East Coast for 16 years and so far have not even suffered a power outage during a hurricane. And then please let me hasten to add, point number two, West Coast, I realize that doesn't apply to you. I know you guys are the ones that are taking it off the chin every time, it seems like. By the time the hurricanes get to us, they're all raged out. So, thoughts and prayers, and thank you for your service. Okay, but since there is a Hurricane Milton to be exact, that gives me a chance to catch up on some of these podcasts. And there are about 3 ideas that I've been wanting to get out to you guys, so this is going to be like our Hurricane series. And I may or may not change wardrobe. But here's what I'd like to do. Now, I do have a bad habit of letting these videos get a little bit long. Maybe I'm a little long-winded. I am a lawyer at the end of the day. So I'm going to try and make an effort to give these to you in a little more bite-sized fashion. Yeah, so for anybody new to the program, we're aimed specifically at small business owners and real estate investors. Now, I'm not trying to pontificate or be anybody's guru. It's just that in my 16 years of practice, I've probably made every mistake there is to make. And, we might as well try to learn from that, both of us, right? Now, as for today's topic, I want to talk about land trusts. And I know what you're thinking, Jeff, geez, you've talked and written a lot about land trusts and trusts generally, don't you think? You're not wrong. And in fact, if you go back to episode 12, you'll see that I lay out the whole formula for what I would recommend as, setting up your real estate portfolio and indeed your estate planning generally. However, in the spirit of drilling down into a little more detail and taking things in more bite-sized fashion, I want to focus on the bottom tier of that whole structure that I described in episode 12, and that is the land trusts. Something new has come up recently. Well, it's not new, but just a new thought has come up, and I want you to be aware of this. So here we go. Just to kind of recap very briefly. Now, many of you will use LLCs for your real estate properties, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. I would suggest it's maybe not the most efficient thing because, as you know, LLCs have to be registered with the state. There's a small cost to that. And then you have to renew every single year, and there's a small cost to that as well. And anytime you want to make an amendment, you have to do that through the State Department, and there's a small cost to that, and a little bit of a hassle. So that's my point, is that it's fine if you just have 1 or 2 or 3 investment properties, but if you start getting beyond that, the LLC can become a little cumbersome, and God help you if you forget to renew your LLC, because there's a nasty fine that goes along with that. So, if you can imagine, once you have 4, 5, 10 LLCs, and you missed a renewal date or something, now we're not talking about a small amount of money. Now we are talking about, a chunk of change. Now, I'm not saying don't use an LLC at all. In fact, I do want you to use an LLC, but let's put that at the top of your cluster of real estate properties, your rental properties. And each rental property, we're going to put those in a land trust. And so that's what we're talking about here today. Now, just to kind of recap very quickly here. So a land trust, what are some of the advantages? You don't have to register it with the State Department. It's just a holding entity, and it exists as a piece of paper, essentially. You'll have the name of the land trust on the title, but beyond that, it's just a trust agreement, which is an entirely confidential document. If you need to make any changes, you just make the changes. There's no filing amendments or anything of the sort. So it's really good, one, from a confidentiality point of view. It's also very good from a flexibility point of view. So, maybe it depends upon the property. If we're talking about 3 relatively low value properties, stick them all in one land trust. I don't see why not. Whereas on the other hand, if there's a commercial property or a more valuable piece of real estate property, then let's give it its own land trust and protect it better that way. So that is what I have said in the past, and it sounds reasonable enough, but I think I'm going to move away from that, and I will tell you why. Well, first, let's just talk about the general concept of liability that you're trying to mitigate. So obviously, if you have a rental property, somebody could get shot, somebody could fall down the stairs, there are a million things they could do, stub a toe, whatever. And so you're going to get sued sooner or later. You're going to get sued for something that happened related to the property. And if you have just one property in the land trust, then it's just that one property that's exposed. Whereas if you have 2 or 3 properties in that land trust, well, the lawsuit's going to be against the land trust. So all the assets that belong to the land trust will be potentially exposed to that litigation or whatever it might be. So from that point of view, I think that the advice I've given my clients heretofore has been good, right? It really just comes down to your personality. How risk adverse are you? Maybe to you, it's not worth the cost of setting up a land trust, which we're going to talk about, at least in my area, are suddenly becoming more aggressive. So how is that going to affect you? So let's say that you have a tenant who has an inoperable vehicle in the driveway, or they allow the lawn to get too high, or the fence was put up without a permit, or any number of these dumb things that the code enforcement officers come up with to cite you for. Well, fine, you're going to have to deal with that, and it often is not as easy to deal with these code enforcement, municipalities as one might expect. So it could take some time. Whether it's your fault or not. I mean, just in my experience, it could take some time to get that resolved. Now let's talk about bleeding liens. This is really what I wanted to get to today. So here we go. Let's say you have 3 properties in your land trust, and one of them has some silly code violation on it, and you want to sell property number 3, a totally different property. Shouldn't be a problem, right? Oh, but it is. The city or the county, whatever code enforcement department you're dealing with, they look at the owner and all the properties that are owned by that particular owner. So if you have 3 properties in your land trust, then that land trust is the owner of all 3 of those properties, and they're not going to clear violations off of property number 1 until all the violations affecting properties number 2 and number 3 are also cleared. Well, let's just say, and I have seen this, that the issue you're having with property number 1 is maybe going to take a little time to resolve. Maybe you disagree with code enforcement. Maybe you need to go get in front of a magistrate judge for a hearing to work something out. Well, in the meanwhile, you can't do anything with properties 2 and 3. They're all tied up, waiting for the resolution of your issue with property number 1. So in my mind, this changes the calculation now. So whereas you may be not so risk adverse that you're, unwilling to risk an injury in one of your properties affecting your other properties, I think that now we're dealing with something that's so frequent and seems to be becoming more frequent, that changes the analysis. It's no longer worth it to put multiple properties in one land trust. I think to me, it's clear. If you're in the business, and this is what you're going to be doing to make money, then don't mess around. Put each and every one of your rental properties in its own land trust, not only for protection against just regular liability, people getting hurt or whatever, but also just to guard against code enforcement. And that brings me to my last point. So what is the cost of putting together a land trust? Because I've said that those are more cost effective, they're cheaper, basically, than having a bunch of LLCs. And that is for sure true. So what are we talking about here? Okay, well, let's all say it together. It depends. It only depends for this reason. If you just want to put a property into the land trust as a holding entity, and it's as simple as that, and the whole thing flows up to your LLC, as I've described in episode 12, we have a simple template for that. We sell it cheap. It's quick and easy, and it's basically a non-issue. On the other hand, if you maybe have other investors in that property and you need to put the terms of the partnership and exit strategies and things like that into that trust agreement, okay, well, that's going to be a different price. But nonetheless, remember what I said at the outset. There's no state filing fees, there's no renewals, there's no charge to amend your document. It's a one-time fixed rate, and then you're done. So you're still going to come out ahead. But that's all I have for you in this one. I promised I was going to try and keep these a little more bite-sized for you. Just remember the concept of bleeding liens. That's what inspired me to do this video. So that's the end of the analysis, guys. I mean, for me, from what I'm seeing in my practice, code enforcement is becoming more aggressive. For whatever reason, it's becoming more of an issue for my clients. And that just pushes it over the top. Don't try and put multiple properties in one land trust. It's not worth it. Just keep them separate, each one in their own land trust. Now, that doesn't necessarily go for your homestead, your primary residence, because if you're in Florida, you get very good homestead protection just under the Constitution, the state Constitution. So that's a separate analysis. We can talk about that in a consultation. But for your rental properties, separate land trust for each and every one. Thank you as always for tuning into our Practice Makes Perfect podcast, Hurricane Edition. I suppose by the time you see this video, if West Palm Beach is just desolation, that's on me. That's my bad. See you next time.